All right, so please join me in welcoming Bryan Ford. Bryan leads the Decentralized Distributed Systems Lab at EPFL. He got his PhD at MIT, and since then he has held faculty positions at Yale University first and EPFL later. He has received a number of awards, including the prestigious NSF Career Award. And his research focuses on distributed systems, blockchain technologies, and e-democracy. Among his most famous contributions, we have sharded blockchains. He is one of the pioneers in this domain to enhance scalability in blockchain technologies, and liquid democracy. And today, Bryan is going to talk about digital personhood towards technology that securely serves people. And something that is very nice about this talk is not only that it will be interesting, I'm sure, from a scientific perspective, but also Bryan is collaborating with actual governmental agencies, including the DARPA, Information Science Technology Study Group, and the Swiss Federally Voting Experts Dialogue, in order to really try to make a difference when it comes to using digital technologies in the context of e-democracy. So this is going to be a quite fascinating talk, bringing together societal aspects and scientific aspects. I'm really looking forward to it. And okay, Bryan, without further ado, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So this talk will be really full of a lot more about problems than solutions, and I think you'll see why. So I've done a lot of technical research in a lot of spaces, but what I want to talk about today is something that's fairly new as a research topic, for me and for others. So there aren't a lot of really solid solutions yet, but I hope you'll agree that it's an interesting problem, and I hope to persuade you of that. So let's jump in. What am I going to talk about? So first, I want to ask the question. Well, the internet is often said to be democratizing. Is the internet democratizing? What does that mean? What should it mean? Can it be democratizing? And then I want to look a little deeper into self-governance foundations online, both in general and in decentralized distributed systems like blockchains. I want to look at one of the key often proposed solutions to some of these problems, which is digital identity, and try to convince you that this is a siren song. Identity may solve some things, but it doesn't solve this. It doesn't solve online governance or democratization. And so and then I want to present digital personhood and talk about what that means to me, what we can do with it, how we might be able to create it, and then finally conclude. So just to set the stage, in case anybody hadn't noticed, we're facing some very hard global problems, such as climate change, a certain pandemic that we're all intimately familiar with, and other things like exploding inequality, which the pandemic is only making worse, as if you've been paying attention, right? And of course, global problems need global tools to find global solutions. This only makes sense. Can our information technology help? Right? The internet is a very global tool. Can it be a significant part of the solution to some of these global problems? In particular, can network-based computing help us find wise, well-informed, well-reasoned solutions that actually act in everyone's collective interest? Right? So this is, I think, a very fundamental problem. Now, in thinking about that, I want to look at where the internet is in the historical timescale. So, think about how new the internet. It's basically only a few decades old in the time scale of recorded history. It's just a little recent blip following other major transformative technologies like computing to start with, electricity going farther back, and even the first large-scale information resource, of course, the printing press, right? But even all of those are much more recent. Really, these are young upstarts compared to one of the most transformative technologies of history, namely the invention of democracy. It goes back 500 years BC, which it has always been imperfect. It's been coming and going throughout the world, but has when it works, provides some kind of tool to enable people to make collective decisions, sometimes wise, sometimes not, but that at least try to be accountable to some kind of public, some kind of collective interest or population, right? So let's come back to the internet. Like I mentioned, the internet is often called a democratizing technology. What does that mean, right? Now, so in the early days of the internet, maybe some of you are old enough, like me, some of us old geezers remember the Usenet, the first major decentralized public information resource and platform for discussion groups. And there were a lot of books and there was a lot of excitement back in the 90s, in the heyday of the Usenet, about how this forum was so democratizing, right? There was a very interesting book called Netizens about this development, kind of a collective book, and it had a whole chapter on the computer as a democratizer. Right. Of course, much more recently, perhaps more likely in the memory of at least some people, social media and the Arab Spring much later caused a lot of excitement. So it was called Democracies' Fourth Wave, and various other things, right? And these are just two examples. But is the internet democratizing, right? And of course, as you can see from more recent years, there's a lot more question about that now, right? So let's pull apart that question a little bit and reason. What should democratizing mean? Well, we have to understand what democracy means, right? And I want to point out a couple. There's many different definitions and analyses of what democracy means, what it is. But I want to just point to a couple samples. One is a very nice page by the Council of Europe on democracy, a very concise summary. And then a much more extensive, deeper analysis by a famous political scientist and political philosopher named Robert Dahl, who wrote a wonderful book in the 70s or late 60s called Democracy and Its Critics. Now let's see what they say the key criteria of democracy are, right? So Council of Europe, again, has a very simple, concise summary of the basic idea, right? Democracy, if it's functioning well, should give a population, should give people autonomy, so some control over what happens to them, right? And moreover, people should have equality in this process, in that each person has approximately the same potential to influence what happens to them, right? Now, Robert Dahl, being a political philosopher, of course, expands on this and gets a lot deeper. He came up with 5 very interesting, of course, debatable, but I think fairly spot on criteria for effective democracy. Namely effective participation, voting equality, enlightened understanding, control of the agenda, and inclusiveness. Now, we could get really deep into all of these. I'm not going to. I'm going to just rely on these all being relatively self-explanatory, which I think they are. And I just want to briefly think about this question. Is the internet democratizing, right? Now, The internet, of course, a lot of people that call the internet democratizing probably don't necessarily mean it's democratizing in the sense of creating democracy automatically, and that it obviously doesn't. Well, what it does do, which is very exciting and very important, is it kind of gives everyone a voice and a platform. Everyone can be a publisher, a writer, anybody can speak, right? In principle. Right, but if you think about the the other principles of democracy, right? Equality, enlightened understanding, effective participation. That's a little bit more tricky to reason about. Whether and to what extent the internet and the platforms we use, provide or even support those properties. Right, so I'm not going to go too much deeper into this, but I just want to. At a very high level, make a point that on my personal agenda, I really wish a lot more CS research, computer science research, would focus on three really critical societal problems. And I think these are our problems. These are not just the problems of political scientists and economists and social science. They're computer science problems too, right? One is equality. How can our technology enable us to enable self-governance, to give all people equal rights, equal voice, rights, and benefits, and not just enable the domination of the loudest voice or the fattest wallet? How can our technology, enable inclusion? How can we ensure computing serves all people, including those with old hardware or poor connectivity or even no connectivity, right? And finally, autonomy. Going back to the Council of Europe's individual autonomy is really critical, right? How can our technology really put people and communities in control of our computing technology rather than vendors, social media and other platforms, app stores, algorithms, and so on? Right. Now, of course, this is, these three problems are far too broad to deal with in one talk, so I'm not going to try. So for the rest of the talk, I just want to focus on the first one of these problems, equality. So that leads me to the next section. So if we aspire to have any kind of reasonable self-governance foundations online, we have to self-governance online. We need foundations of some kind. So let's think of what those foundations can be. Can digital forums and communities self-govern? We have to answer this question. What is the foundation? How do we count votes? How do we count collective decisions? Right. So we first need to define membership. Who gets a vote at all? And then we need to define influence. How much power, how much voting power does each member wield in whatever processes we define? And in general, there's basically two ways that we can do this that are reasonably common. One is wealth-centric, $1, one vote. The other is person-centric, one person, one vote, right? So, and a ton of systems and organizational mechanisms, both real world and online, boil down to one of these classes or the other, right? And if any kind of organization can't decide, what its foundations are, how these things are counted, then, it doesn't work, it collapses. So, of course, as, much more of our lives shifts online, we're ever more reliant on these kinds of online self-governance solutions, which runs us into a problem. The wealth-centric approaches actually have many solutions, so both centralized and decentralized. The problem is the person-centric for all organizations that want a more person-centric foundation, where we've got much more of a problem. And of course, this includes democracy, right? If we want person-based self-organization, democracy's foundation is people. And unfortunately, digital democracy, any form of digital democracy, has a real problem. Namely, people are physical, not digital objects, right? Today's internet, today's whole online ecosystem doesn't really know what a person is, because people aren't digital. Only profiles are digital, pieces of information records. And unfortunately, these are very fakeable information. So, online, a lot of the, so-called people are fake, because profiles are cheap, discardable, and easy to synthesize with bots or AI. This, as a result, online services, online platforms really can't count anything one per person, votes or anything else. This also has a lot of implication, like counting reputation metrics like followers. A lot of the followers are fake. This makes it easier for miscreants to promulgate fake news and get it upvoted. Same with fake reviews and other fake information. And other reputation metrics like likes, right? So these are all cases of what we call the Sybil attack problem. Whenever we're counting entities that are pretending to be people, are they real people or are they fake people? And unfortunately, it's been shown that really a lot of what's on the internet is ultimately fake, right? And as a result, pretty much everybody knows this. Everybody knows you can't do, real vote counting or real democracy, anything like that online. And so what we're left with is a bunch of ad hoc guardianships, to use another political science word. So we have to rely on companies, governments, opaque algorithms, private oversight boards, basically to govern online behavior for us in ways that are definitely generally not accountable, just because democracy in the one person, one vote sense isn't even an option. So what's the missing foundation here? So it seems like we're definitely missing something critical. Can we build digital organizations, digital online governance based on people? Now, coming back to the problem, what would this entail, right? For such a foundation would need to be inclusive, namely open to all real people, but not to bots or Sybils. It would need to be equitable. All people need to get equal power and benefits. One person, one vote, not $1, one vote. It would need to be secure and transparent and verifiable by people so that people can trust in it. And it would need to have privacy to protect people's rights, freedoms, and ultimately their individual autonomy. So that's the essential equality problem as I see it. Now let's look quickly at a solution that's often proposed in this space that I don't feel is a solution, namely digital identity, right? So is digital identity the missing foundation we need? I claim no. I think, at least for this purpose, digital identity is a red herring. At best, it's the wrong tool. It may be useful for other things, but it's not useful for this. And at worst, it might actually be a siren song. It might be actively harmful to have digital identity and to try to use it for this purpose. Why is this? This is because digital identities are just more profiles. They're just more information about people, right? They're sets of attributes like I have a degree that you don't. I'm male, you're female. I'm this, you're that. Profiles are about distinguishing between people, discriminating between people, for better or worse, in one way or another, right? Democracy fundamentally is not about distinguishing between or discriminating among people. It, like I said, it presumes the equality of people. What attribute I have that you don't should not matter in terms of counting votes, right? In terms of determining the basis for self-governance, right? So nevertheless, it still might be useful, of course, to implement some kind of equality principle, and it can be used for that. But pretty much all of the standard approaches to using digital identity as a basis for democracy or online self-governance have serious flaws. So let's just look at a few of the common approaches. Now, starting with, say, social media identities. Well, these are cheap, easy to create. They're very usable. Practically everybody has them, so they're attractive in that way. They're user friendly, but nevertheless they're pretty easy to fake, and they're faked a lot. And fakery is getting a lot easier and more effective. It's hard to detect fakes. In order to do so, platforms have to see and watch everything. So trying to detect fakes basically contributes to incentives for mass surveillance and algorithm-based governance. These processes of, of detecting fake are basically necessary, opaque, and unaccountable, right? And AI can get things really disastrously wrong, as we've seen. AI can be bigoted and racist and so on. And also the fakers, the bad guys, also have AI. And the bad AI gets better and better just as fast as the good AI defenders do, right? And so this basically sets up a never-ending arms race. Now, I do want to acknowledge some very clever and interesting computer science algorithms, such as social trust graph analysis algorithms, that in principle can detect and encounter certain types of attacks, like one Sybil attacker trying to create a huge so-called Sybil region. Problem is, these kinds of algorithms fundamentally can't handle other fairly straightforward attacks, like lots of users, like every user in a system being perhaps incentivized to create lots of little Sybil regions, a few extra Sybil attackers for each person. And these fundamentally can't be detected because they can't be distinguished between, from totally legitimate situations, right? So yeah, so much for social media identities as a basis for online personhood. What about other kinds of proofs? Proof of work, proof of stake, right? So these have been very popular in the cryptocurrency blockchain community recently, and they are attractive in that they are secure, generally secure. They're permissionless; anybody can participate. And they're nicely privacy preserving. You don't need to show anyone an ID in order to perform proof of work. The problem is they're completely, they're investment-based, not personhood-based foundations. You can even get, try to make them personhood-based by using, say, something like CAPTCHAs, like Turing tests. But then, even then, you're not, even if CAPTCHAs work, you're measuring, the amount of time and determination a person invests in solving them. More people, or more time means more CAPTCHAs, and so this is not, this is still a time-based investment. And even more so proof of work, where the more compute power and energy you waste, the more stake you get, the more votes you get. Similarly with proof of stake, where you just buy more, you get more. So these are all $1, 1 vote type foundations, and not what we're looking for. Now, of course, let's not forget classic solutions to this, which is such as government issued identities. Now, this is what a lot of well-established processes like know your customer processes for banks do. And government issued ID is a moderately functional, well-supported system. We have identity verification services, increasingly AI-based, which you can use online. Again, unfortunately, even if the original IDs we're trying to verify are perfect, again, we have the problem that the bad guys have AI too, and deep fakes are getting better and better. So it's unclear how long or how reliable these online identity verification services can remain, right? Of course, there's a lot of interest in self-sovereign identity, decentralizing identity, but these, generally rely on the same kind of government issued identities or other things below the, classic methods of evidence. And even the underlying IDs tend to be forgeable once you get online. They can also be lost or stolen. So ID demands tend to exclude people. There's a lot of refugees and other marginalized populations that don't have IDs and have a really hard time getting IDs. So demanding IDs tend to invade privacy, and it's very hard to make identification systems privacy preserving. And even if we could, it's often very, there's a lot of good reasons why people want to use multiple identities, multiple alter egos online, say, to reflect different parts of their personality in different online profiles, even on the same system like Twitter, with having different profiles for different sides of you, right? So, this is a standard thing, and privacy advocates will normally say, it's a good thing to be able to do this. Now, beyond this, so even though we have relatively well-developed know your customer and identity services, well, there's all these disadvantages, such that in particular that it's identity documents are actually not that hard to fake or steal or buy, right? So let's move on. So the fourth approach, which is often seen as a really promising technological solution, is biometric identity, right? So everybody has a unique biological fingerprints of various kinds, right? And of course, this is what India. The approach India adopted nationally a number of years ago as one of the most ambitious nationwide programs in their Aadhaar program. And of course, this this has some attractions and advantages. Technically, it's scalable. You can have a lot of you can build a lot of biometric scanning and registration equipment. On the other hand, it has a lot of really critical disadvantages and issues as well. It's not perfectly reliable. Furthermore, the unreliability is exacerbated by the problem that that unlike say logging into a phone, where you only need a one-to-one comparison of a previously stored fingerprint or face pattern. With biometric identity, you have to have what they call deduplication. You have to detect and exclude duplicates. And that basically requires collecting all of these biometrics in a central database in order to do this deduplication. And you have to make 1 to billions comparisons. There's over 1 billion people in the Aadhaar database, and any new registration, any new registrant basically has to prove that I am not any of those existing billions, even based on a false positive, right? And that's a many orders of magnitude harder problem in terms of reliability. So there's also a huge privacy problem this creates, and ultimately a big problem with single points of failures or compromise. Basically, one compromised registration device or registration station can just create, for example, use a digital fakery to create many plausible fake biometric templates that don't match anyone in the database, but also don't actually correspond to a real person, right? So biometrics don't fundamentally solve the unique personhood or digital personhood problem. Right. So if you're interested, I recommend there are some very interesting articles on all the amazing things that go wrong in widely deployed biometric identity systems like Aadhaar. So in summary, to summarize what I want to say about identity, all of the known approaches to digital identity have really serious flaws, at least when applied to just distinguishing people uniquely. And in particular, they have none of the critical, they reliably have none of the critical properties we want, namely inclusiveness, equitability, security, or privacy. They all have serious failures in all of these dimensions. So recognizing that, I want to step back and ask, is the cart pulling the horse, right? Are we starting with the wrong thing? Maybe identity is still useful, but it needs its own foundation. It needs to build on top of something else. And that's exactly what I'm proposing, right? Before we even start getting to digital identity, we need to first talk about digital personhood, right? Understanding and now enabling our ecosystem to know what is a person versus not a person, and what is a different person versus the same person. Okay, so that leads to my next section, where I want to talk about this idea of digital personhood, where we're not focused on identifying or differentiating between people, but just trying to recognize people as equals, and preferably do it in a privacy preserving way, right? So what is digital personhood, and how do you prove it? So we proposed a term a few years ago called proof of personhood, inspired by proof of work, proof of stake, etc. But the goal being, of course, to prove that you're a real person, rather than to prove that you did work or staked something, right? So what is proof of personhood? Basically a mechanism to verify people, not identities. And it can be used for a lot of different things. But the key goals are, again, inclusion. Any real human should be able to participate. Equality. One person should get one vote, regardless of how rich they are or how much work they're willing to put in. It should be secure, in that it should protect both individuals from each other and from attackers, but it should also protect the collective, protect everyone from Sybil attackers and other abusers, right? And finally, it should provide privacy, free expression, association, identity, all of the critical aspects supporting individual autonomy. So many of the ideas in this talk are represented in a preprint that's available online and in the archive. If in case you're interested, I'll just put a link there. My slides will also be available later with links in case anyone is interested. And of course, this is only one of quite a number of pieces of work and writings especially in the last few years in this space. I'm very excited to see how interest in proof of personhood and related ideas has really exploded in the community. And I'll come back to this a little bit later. But to start with, I want to focus on the original idea in this space that I proposed way back in 2008, over 12 years ago. And the idea was I called pseudonym parties. This was a physical world proposal to get some kind of proof of personhood. Now, what was the basic idea of this proposal? Well, it's based on not very novel or new observation that, real people have real bodies in the real world. We're embodied, existent people, at least, when we're not bots. Now, maybe we can actually use our real bodies once in a while. So it's a cost. As geeks, we're not used to doing that all the time, but there's a real important security property we can build on, which is that real people have only one body each, and real people can only be in one place at a time, right? Unless you're John Malkovich anyway. And so if we're willing to once in a while get off our butts and go to a real in-person event, maybe periodically, like the in-person voting events that certain Swiss cantons still do a few times a year, right? But maybe not for the purpose of voting, but for other purposes, right? Now, of course, during a pandemic, if we're not vaccinated, maybe we need to be spread out. Fortunately, the things are getting better in terms of this, but again, the purpose is not immediately for voting or to do anything in particular, except just to allow people to prove their personhood, to transparently show the world, hey, I exist, I'm here, I'm a real person, in a way that can persuade everyone, and to get one personhood token each, right? So one way this can work, there's many ways, many variations that I won't get into, but one way it can work is imagine some kind of event with two areas. It could be a concert or a lecture or something like that, but it has both kind of the main event area and a lobby area. right? And both areas are big enough to accommodate everybody who wants to attend, and everyone who wants to attend and get a token is expected to gather in the first area, the lobby area, before a certain deadline, right? At the deadline, the gong sounds, the organizers close the entrance and basically stop letting anyone else in. If you want your token, you got to be in by the deadline. Now, after that time, everybody then moves from the lobby area to the main event or whatever, wherever else, and you get one token while you leave the lobby area. So because each person has only one body and you can't get back in again, if everything goes well, if this physical security process is enforced appropriately, it doesn't matter who you are. You don't have to show ID. You just have to have a real body. And because you only have one real body, you're going to get only one token each as you leave. Now, a flavor of this principle has actually been used for over 50 years in India. In fact, before Aadhaar and in this infatuation with digital technology kind of took over. And it has a big track record. It's not perfect. It definitely has some security and privacy issues, which I won't get into. But it's very interesting. So, and it's still used in other places. Basically, when you go to vote, you get checked to see if you have a certain stain on your finger that doesn't wash for a couple days, right? And if you don't, you get the stain, and you get to vote. But well, hopefully you can't come back because your stain will be on your finger, right? So again, not perfect for various reasons, but it is some approximation. So let's get back to pseudonym parties. Of course, there are plenty of challenges. I'm sure you're thinking of some of them immediately, right? If they might be a pain to get to, right? What if there's not one close by? Well, one of the goals in developing this idea, is to try to see, well, how cheap and easy can they be made to organize? Can they be made cheap and easy and scalable enough so that in a population with enough critical mass, there's going to be a pseudonym party fairly close to you, pretty much no matter where you are, right? So of course, we'd have to get critical mass before that happens, but it's a question. Can that happen? Now, can this scale? Well, one of the ways it can in particular scale is by having synchronized events, right? So now, they have to be synchronized if you want these tokens to be interchangeable across parties, while still strictly enforcing a one person, one token rule. Because of course you don't want somebody to be able to attend one party and then hop on over to another and get another token and then hop over to a third and so on, right? But as long as they're simultaneous, at least for some class of some federation of parties, then you get a free choice of which party you attend at each iteration, but you can only be at only once because again you have only one body, right? So again you have free choice, and these of course could and probably should be organized around events people want to attend anyway, perhaps like concerts, political rallies or protests, festivals, parties people want to be at anyway. Or more seriously, humanitarian aid distributions or other events. Of course, not everybody is very mobile, but obvious question is, can these be cheap and easy to organize enough that they can be organized in hospital atriums and anywhere where people might want to attend one but not be able to move very far or very easily. That could be organized around religious occasions, right? So people have a lot of reasons to attend a lot of kinds of events anyway. Can we leverage those? Now, yeah, there's other problems like the problem that, if we're trying to synchronize these, then a convenient time, somewhere is always a really bad time somewhere else in the world, right? But this is not necessarily a huge problem if we don't necessarily need to say that every party in the world is synchronized with every other. We might, for example, define, say, 3 big regions and say, well, maybe it's okay if a few people are around the borders can regularly get tokens in 2 regions at a time, right? Now, there's another big issue that I want to acknowledge that's really important, especially in applying this to digital democracy, things like voting. And that is, how do we know that when somebody shows up and gets a token and then uses it for, say, voting, how do we know that their vote is representing their true intent? How do we know that they weren't paid by someone to attend and then turn over their token to whoever whoever wanted to stuff the ballot box, right? So what is the incentive for attending? And this is really not a new problem. This is a problem with any kind of remote voting systems already. Not just digital personhood systems, but any voting system that allows people to vote in in an arbitrary environment that the election authority doesn't control. And this is why a lot of voting experts say really only in-person voting is adequate, right? But we don't think so. So we think that e-voting can be made to work and can be made even coercion resistant based on proof of personhood. It's just that we need to decouple when you vote versus when you have the moment of privacy outside of a coercer's control. For example, if we can allow people, incorporate the notion of privacy booth into the proof of personhood or pseudonym party environment, where you can, when you pick up your token, you can actually go in, have a moment of privacy out of a potential coercer's control and pick up both real and fake tokens, real and decoy tokens, right? Then you can actually give the tokens away, sell them if anybody's willing to give you money for them, but and they will appear to work, but only the real ones will actually count, right? Say in online voting, right? And only the person who actually was there in the booth will actually know which is which. Now, this is making this work is a hard and interesting problem that we're working on. We actually have some e-voting research that's focused on addressing that problem, both for classic voting and for the proof of personhood use case. But I won't get deeper into that right now. So just to summarize, like I said earlier, I'm talking in this talk a lot more about problems than solutions. There's a lot of interesting to say about the solution space, different approaches, the approaches we're trying to explore, and other approaches. So for the last few semesters, we've actually gotten we've had regular projects involving 10 or more undergrads each semester working on prototyping and testing a prototype proof of personhood system, as well as our PhD students, of course. And this ongoing project is also inspiring and driving some of the other research we're working on, such as our continuing work in blockchains, work in resilient locality sensitive computing, asynchronous consensus, and, as I mentioned, coercion resistant e-voting. Now, I want to acknowledge that one of the things that I find so exciting about this topic, even though it's very immature yet, is it seems to be catching on as in the broader community. There are a few researchers, computer science researchers, already working on this. We're not the only ones, but also a lot in the broader blockchain community and activist community. For example, there's the Encoder project in Zurich. that's doing something somewhat similar, but different in a lot of details in interesting ways. I encourage you to check it out. There's different approaches to trying to do something like this purely online, for example, by getting people together to convince each other that they're real people in video chats, in group video chat sessions, right? And verify each other online. There's another somewhat related project, which is really interesting, is Idena, which doesn't require, again, it's a purely online approach, but it doesn't use video chat. Instead, it asks people to basically challenge each other to puzzles, puzzles that are similar to Turing tests or CAPTCHAs, but a little bit different, to try to verify each other's personhood and unique personhood, right? Now, there are, of course, other approaches that rely on very different foundations. For example, we can use existing identities of different kinds and just try to anonymize existing identities, make them more privacy preserving as basis for proof of personhood. And this is, of course, interesting and worth exploring too. My group has explored it. A few years ago, we developed a prototype called Crypto Book, which basically tries to anonymize social media credentials, so like your Facebook or Twitter profiles. And then just very recently, the Cornell group created a very interesting scheme called Candid, which similarly provides a Sybil-resistant anonymized identity based on government identity, like social security numbers. Right. Now, we could get a lot deeper into the comparisons, and I'm interested in the differences of these, strengths and weakness of these different approaches. As far as I've seen, only the offline, physical world approach really seems to be convincingly seems to have all the 4 critical properties, or be able to achieve all 4 critical properties. But that's still a very open question, which, how will this turn out? Okay. So I know I'm running a little long, but and I'm almost done. I just want to add a brief note, exploring, suppose we could do this. Suppose we could create this kind of, digital personhood foundation. What would it be useful for, right? Of course, it would be useful for exactly what I motivated to talk by in the start, and I think that's the most important thing, to give us better tools to deal with the governance problem, allow us to make better, wiser collective decisions that really reflect everybody, represent everybody online, not just small minorities in a few working, functional democratic governments, right? But we really need to scale this, right? And I think there's ideas in ways to truly scale a democracy, make it more participative, more participatory, liquid democracy, and other innovations like sortation-based polling and deliberation, mini publics. This is a concept that's really taken hold in the political and social science space. And so, but to do this online, you've got to have a list to sample from, a way to select people, right? And proof of personhood could provide that list, right? So of course, proof of person could do a lot more mundane things as well that would also be useful, if maybe less important, like just replacing CAPTCHAs, which are getting harder and harder because of the AI arms race. Pretty soon the AIs is going to be better at solving CAPTCHAs than we real people are at solving them. But taking that further, we could create pseudonymous single sign-on mechanisms, like instead of sign on with Facebook or Twitter, how about just signing on as a person, so that each real person gets one real pseudonym account anywhere on any website where you might want to use it, right? This could give us a better basis for supporting crowdsourcing, even anonymous crowdsource work without such a sock puppet problem. News sites all over could enable their comment sections again with a better basis for being able to block abusers and not have them immediately come back. We could, coming back to the blockchain and cryptocurrency, we could build on this to create cryptocurrencies that allow everybody to print money at some monetary policy at an equal rate. That's another, really interesting question. We can give people even stronger anonymity, but make it accountable so that you can be anonymous and be sure that nobody's going to be able to de-anonymize you, but anybody who doesn't want to hear from you, wants to stop hearing from you, can block you, right? So I think, there's a lot of applications if we can build this, but, can we get there? So just to wrap up, I want to propose that our whole digital ecosystem has a very fundamental problem of fundamental missing foundation, and I propose that foundation is digital personhood. We need to teach our digital ecosystem what a person is in a way that's that is both secure but respects our rights and freedoms. We need a new kind of social contract for the digital world. And that might mean that, a social contract always has a cost, and having a cost is okay. Maybe it means you have to regularly invest some kind of effort to show up, to prove that you're a real person, right? But of course, it's going to have many rewards. It can have many rewards and protections in the digital world, right? It can provide a right to privacy and anonymity, while also protecting you from anonymous abuse. So it can help provide rights of freedom of speech, but also right to protection from unfair amplification of other people's speech. So through things like cryptocurrencies, crypto UBIs, it can help bolster rights to equal economic opportunities, right? And ultimately, it can support our rights to inclusion and to be able to help us build systems that not only are decentralized but stay decentralized over time. So, coming back to my original question, can we? Clearly, the internet as it stands is not really democratizing in the democracy sense, but can we make it a little bit more that way? Clearly, it needs to support the notion of equality in terms of people in order to do that, right? So it needs to provide not just a platform where the loudest or richest voice wins, but something that actually supports equality, inclusion, and autonomy. And I propose that digital personhood in general is a way to work toward that, even though if we don't yet know exactly the best way to achieve it. So we need one person, one vote without having to identify people or invade people's privacy. And, again, there are many potential ways to do that. How best to do it is ongoing research. And if we succeed, there's a huge number of applications and benefits. But, we have to get there before we can really find that out. So thank you again for your attention. And I'd be very happy to take questions.
All right, so thanks, Bryan, for the nice and fascinating talk. So are there questions? So I start. So I have a question. When you were presenting this proof of personhood, what I didn't get exactly is what about security? So like, how do you prevent like people from just giving away some of their proofs of personhood? And is it possible somehow by that to screw up or make, personhood somewhat, skewed in a way or in the other?
Absolutely. So great question. Yeah. So how do we run pseudonym parties securely and transparently to make sure that, say, the organizers just can't create a bunch of extra tokens and keep them for themselves, right? So Yeah, and so that's an aspect of the kind of the running of these pseudonym parties that we're developing. The most important principle that I think underlines the solutions we're looking at is transparency, right? Both physical process transparency, the fact that these are intended to be public events. Anybody should be able to, and even be expected to, watch what they're seeing, record what they're seeing, keep account of how many people move from the lobby to the main event, on video, in person, by attestation, right? So there should be many eyes on these processes in the physical world. And at the end of one of these events, this is where we get back to blockchains and things like that as transparency technologies. The organizers are going to have to post a list of the tokens that were collected, right? So this is just a public list of tokens, like public keys. They're not identifying at all. They're just, random public keys. But it's going to be clear to everyone how long that list is, right? And so anybody can check, the list, the length of the list the organizer posted, and see, well, does that match with, the number of people that we all saw go through the line, right? If it doesn't match by one or two, maybe you get a little bit worried, but well, human error or something went wrong. If it doesn't match by, more than one or two, then, people start getting suspicious and asking questions, right? And maybe you stop trusting the organizers. Maybe you go to a different party or something like that next time. Now, of course, there's the next deeper question of, did the organizers put the correct public keys, the correct tokens on the list, as opposed to stealing them? That's actually, but that's actually less. That's not a problem for the Sybil attack problem, right? You've produced the correct number of tokens, but maybe you've distributed them wrong. But that's a problem that the individuals who got gypped out of their tokens will notice, right? So that's kind of an issue of personal trust between, the individuals attending a party and the organizers, right? And so it's very readily detectable, at least by the individuals who didn't get their tokens, and they will, start asking questions, complaining, and at the worst, go to a different party next time, or create their own. Right. So there's, it's a hard problem, but there are solutions based on transparency in both the physical and digital world.
And a follow-up question. So Nicholas, loves concerts. He attends concerts, once a day. What prevents him from, just splitting his identity in 2 or in 3 or in 4, because he has so many tokens that, he just creates symbols on his own. Can he do it?
Yeah, well, so like I said, the pseudonym parties are intended to be periodic, and to whatever extent that and they're only valid in terms of a particular context, a particular moment in time that they were created, right? And if they're regular events, and if they're used for voting or something where you really want one person, one token, then they have to have limited useful lifetimes, right? So if you want them to use them for voting, then you have to have these things, once a month, once a quarter, once a year. And kind of the voting capability attached to them should only last up to the next iteration. Otherwise, you would be able to obviously accumulate many tokens over many events, right? And so accumulating them is fine, but it's kind of up to the application to say how long a given one is valid, for what purpose, right? For other applications, like just say replacing CAPTCHAs, it's probably okay if you can, accumulate them at some rate, once a week, like you go to a concert once a week or even once a day, and you get a new token each time. And you're using those accumulated tokens instead of solving CAPTCHAs puzzles. Well, that's still a much better protection than CAPTCHA itself, right? Because because you can only get them, once a day, once per concert, rather than once every, every 30 seconds, each time you're willing to solve a new CAPTCHA, right? So there's, there's different answers to that depending on the application, but what's critical is kind of the lifetime and the periodicity.
Very good, thanks. So I just read some questions from the chat, or do you want to do that?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't been watching the chat, but I am now. Thanks. So the first one, I wonder if individuals can delegate their decision-making power, such as by transferring POP tokens, to let another person act on their behalf, something like delegated proof of stake. Yes. So really, really good question. For some applications, for some purposes, that I think that's totally okay and could be very useful. This is actually very closely related to the idea of liquid democracy, where, you should, if you're involved in a large participatory activity where a lot of people might be able to deliberate on a lot of different, topics online concurrently, but nobody has time to be in all of them at once. Well, can you delegate your vote, on topics that you're not, you don't have time to participate in all the time? Can you, delegate your vote in some topics to other people, experts in those topics, while participating directly in the topics you want to, right? Obviously, with cryptocurrencies, you just, delegated proof of stake. Well, yeah, you could have delegated proof of personhood, where you want to ask somebody to say participate in proof of personhood consensus for you as your delegate, and and that might be okay too, and that can be done. Now, it's of course a tricky policy question, and also a tricky technical problem to decide, well, when is that not okay? In particular, when the delegation is actually maybe coercive, or when you want it to, you want a deliberative process to be representative of people's true opinions, not an opinion that was bought by someone else, right? And that goes back to the coercion problem or the vote buying problem. I think those problems are solvable too, but it's a lot harder. It requires additional effort, and these are not incompatible. You can have coercion-resistant proof of personhood for voting, while still allowing delegation when you want under the conditions that you want delegation to happen, right? So it's kind of a question of policy and how you build applications on top of this foundation. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. The other question on the chat, how processing of blockchain tokens can be done, and as there will be a concern in complexity of validation. Yes, so good question. How do you build a blockchain? How do you build consensus on top of this? And that's one of the technical areas that we're working on. But it's actually, in principle, if you think about it, it's actually not that it's not that different from, say, a proof of stake system, right? So we already have various ways to implement proof of stake. It's not that easy. There are some tricky security and scalability aspects to get right. But once you've gotten a proof of stake system, which basically does consensus on the base of a list of stakeholders, where each stakeholder might have kind of varying amounts of voting power, based on the amount of stake. Well, all you have to do is replace that list with a proof of personhood list. Replace that list with the output of proof of personhood events, right? The list of public keys that the organizers of personhood parties have produced at the end of each event, right? There's a bunch of details there. But what it amounts to is just kind of creating a stakeholder list for a proof of stake system, but creating that list differently than a proof of stake system would do, right? But then after that list is set by the proof of personhood process, then the actual consensus can work pretty much like a proof of stake system or a delegated proof of stake system, right? So you can have each voter, each person gets to choose, say, one server, one well-known server to represent them in the consensus process. They can run their own, or they can delegate to an expert operator. And then you use a proof of stake like mechanism to distribute consensus voting power across the delegated stakeholders, right? So many of the mechanisms can be about the same, only it's a one person, one vote, list of stakeholders rather than a $1, one investment dollar, one vote list of stakeholders. Okay. So I see another question. A question on the distribution of tickets. If you have to give more occasions to collect the tickets, how do you guarantee one person, one vote without invalidating the prior ones? Well, you don't, right? So that's that's a good question, and the simple answer is you don't, right? It seems that people would be forced to attend every one if multiple allowed, or to not miss the only one that would grant them the access to their online identity, right? So if you want, truly one person, one vote, really strictly, then you kind of have to make attendance, at each one mandatory if you want to have that vote all the time, right? Now, but this leads to the question, well, how bad is it if you miss one, if you miss a cycle, right? And I think that's where we have a lot more flexibility. So it doesn't need to be that bad. If you miss a cycle, in particular, you shouldn't, and you don't need to lose access to your whole online identity, right? So if you're using your proof of personhood tokens to to back, say, social media accounts that are counting real people, well, maybe everybody that you're following or that you're liking, might their follower counts might go down by one, until you during that cycle, until you get a new token at the next cycle, right? So the point is, I don't see these as kind of gateways for a whole online identity at all. These are just basically voting tokens. When you don't have one, you don't get a direct vote, but you can still participate in all kinds of other ways. This is another area where I think liquid democracy and indirect participation mechanisms might be very useful, in that if you're participating in various online discussions, and you're wielding not only your own vote but the delegated votes of other people, well, it's only if you miss a cycle and don't have your pseudonym party from that cycle, you can still keep exercising other people's delegated votes, right? So if your vote is usually, if your delegated voting power is usually 10, well, it goes down to 9, for the cycle that you had to miss, and then it goes back up, right? So same with, applications to cryptocurrencies, right? Well, maybe you lose your universal basic income, for one cycle. It's probably not going to be that valuable anyway, right? It's a small basis, not but hopefully it's not the end of the world, right? So so that's one aspect of it. It shouldn't be the end of the world if you miss one. Now, on the other hand, there is always the possibility that as if this is successful and these things get more important, and and it actually becomes more important to people not to miss one, we will need to come up with exception mechanisms, right? If you really have to be away and have to miss one because you're in the hospital or have a critical job responsibilities, you're an emergency worker or something, right? And I think we can also create exception mechanisms to handle those cases, so that you can let's say virtually attend a party, even if you're not physically there, as long as it's sufficiently transparent and secure, right? So there's a lot of answers, but good question. Thanks.
Thanks. So are there further questions from the audience? I have a final one. It's about trust and usability.
Yeah.
So trust, let's say, you take the average user, he's very comfortable with his ID, and possibly, the city or the state has given to him some certified app that can use to authenticate herself on the internet, and then they feel like very, all these technologies are very trustworthy. I go physical, I get my ID, I have my own app, it's bounded to my phone number, it's okay, it's me, that's trust. And the usability, I have an app, it's very convenient, it works, right? Well, now, you go to people and you have to say, it's really not it's bounded to you, but it's it's done in a way that you go to concerts and trust us that this is gonna all work, because there are some pseudonyms, and it's about frequency, and then it works. So that's the trust argument.
Yeah.
And the usability argument is, now you have to actually to collect all these pops. And is it a problem or not? So in other words, do you think that, did you experience, it's more like a question, did you experience problems of trust or usability in your, like use cases in the setting where you have designed and deployed these techniques, or not, or actually maybe these are not concerns?
Yeah, well, really, really good question. And unfortunately, it's still too early to know. We've had small scale experiments. In the small scale of experiments, it hasn't, trust hasn't yet been a big issue. But of course, I fully expect it to become a big issue if and when this were to scale up to where people, a lot of people are using it for, real things with real stakes, like real elections or something like that. Of course, trust will become a much bigger issue, and we're actually exploring some of those issues, usability and trust issues, in the context of our e-voting work, which applies to this as well as to classic e-voting. And we're hoping to start exploring, to be able to scale these, digital personhood experiments, sometime before too long, to where we can get enough attendees, kind of get enough participation regularly to start exploring the trust issues, but we're not there yet on the, in the context of our POP experiments. Now, I think we have reasonable, plausible ways forward to deal with the trust issues, and again, they all kind of boil down to transparency. Can we show that you don't have to trust any particular device, right? Can we show that you don't have to and should not trust the organizers, right? You have to trust someone. You have to trust, there's no such thing as complete trustlessness, but you should never have to trust any particular kind of single point of compromise. Everybody shouldn't have to trust the same vendor or the same trusted authority and stuff like that. And I think we can achieve that, in proof of personhood, just like in good blockchain technologies and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a really important and challenging problem that we're just scratching the surface of so far.
Very good. So thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I would say if there are no further questions, then I would like to thank again Bryan for the fascinating talk, and we are looking forward to having you in Vienna. So we will invite you for sure as soon as
Thank you. Yeah.
possible. In this case, possible is really meant literally. And with that, thanks to you, thanks everyone, and we will see each other again for the next WISP Distinguished Lecture Series.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.